Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are gonna get a little uncomfortable.
Just a little.
Okay, maybe a lot. We're gonna talk about a rite of passage that, well, practically everyone listening has survived, probably before you're even old enough to form long-term memories. We are talking about the undisputed heavyweight champion of childhood stomach bugs.
It really is the great equalizer. I mean, if you made it to age 5 without meeting this particular virus, you're basically a biological unicorn.
You really are. So today we're cracking open Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, Chapter 30, to dissect the Reoviridae family. And the main character here, the villain, if you will, is Rotavirus.
And our mission today is to go deeper than just the symptoms. We all know what it feels like. It's miserable. But we want to understand the mechanics. Why is this virus built like a tank? How does it hijack your cells while, hiding in plain sight?
And most importantly, how does a microscopic wheal cause enough dehydration to be a major global killer?
That's the key question.
Okay, so before we get into that wheel structure, which is genuinely cool, we will get there, we have to talk about the name. Reovirus. It sounds so official, maybe named after Dr. Rio. But Lippincott says it's actually an acronym.
It is. It stands for Respiratory Enteric Orphan Virus, REO.
Okay, respiratory and enteric, that makes sense. It's in the lungs and the gut. But orphan, that feels weirdly sentimental for a microbiology text. Like, was it abandoned?
It's actually a bit of a historical quirk. When these viruses were first isolated back in the 50s, researchers found them, but they couldn't link them to any specific disease.
Oh.
They were basically viruses in search of an illness. They had no disease parent. So scientists just call them orphans.
Which is wildly ironic now.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? We eventually realized that rotavirus, the star of this family, is responsible for severe viral gastroenteritis. We're talking about an estimated 1 million deaths per year globally.
Wow.
So calling it a harmless orphan was a massive underestimation.
A total sleeper agent. Okay, let's look at the mugshot. If I'm looking at figure 30.1 in the text, how do I spot one of these Reoviridae family members? Because they don't look like a standard flu virus.
No, they're built completely differently. First, they're non-enveloped viruses.
Okay, what does that mean in practical terms?
It means they don't have that soft, fatty outer layer, that lipid envelope that viruses like influenza or COVID use to merge with our cells. They're just a hard, naked protein shell.
Naked always sounds vulnerable to me, but in virology, that's usually the opposite, isn't it?
Precisely. That envelope is fragile, it dries out, it breaks down with alcohol sanitizers.
Right.
But because these guys are naked, they are incredibly robust. They can survive on surfaces, on toys, doorknobs, even in dried stool for a long, long time.
So they're the armored tanks of the viral world.
That's a great way to put it.
And inside that armor, the text makes a big deal about the genome being double-stranded RNA. Why is that a headline?
Because it's pretty rare. Our cells run on double-stranded DNA. Most RNA viruses we talk about are single-stranded. Double-stranded RNA is really stable, but it's also a giant red flag for our immune system, which we'll get into.
Okay.
The other key feature, Chapter 30 mentions, is that the genome is segmented.
Segmented, so it's not one long piece of code, it's chopped up into pieces.
Exactly. It's got 10 to 12 distinct segments of that double-stranded RNA. Think of it like a book with separate chapters instead of one long scroll.
And that's a superpower, right? I feel like I've heard about segments when we talk about the flu.
It works exactly the same way.
Yeah.
It allows for genetic reassortment.
Meaning?
If two different strains of rotavirus infect the same cell at the same time, they can shuffle their segments. It's like mixing two decks of cards together.
And you deal a new hand, and suddenly you've got a brand new hybrid virus.
Exactly. A new viral strain that our immune system might not recognize. It's how it evolves so quickly.
So it's tough. It's naked, and it shuffles its genes. Now let's zoom in on rotavirus. The text says rota is Latin for wheel. If I look at the electron micrograph in figure 30.2, am I actually seeing a wheel? Or do I need to squint?
No squinting required.
Yeah.
It really, really looks like a wheel. It's one of the few viruses that looks just like its name. It has this distinct, smooth outer rim, and then these protein subunits radiating inward like spokes on a wagon wheel.
And the text points out these channels connecting the outside to the core. It's not a solid wall.
Right, and those channels are the supply lines. This virus is a little factory, sits in the cell, and pulls in raw materials, nucleotides, the building blocks for RNA, through those channels. It builds new RNA inside its core, and then it pushes the new RNA back out through those same holes.
That's so efficient. It's like a bunker that never opens its main door, but just keeps sending out instructions through little mail slots.
That is a perfect analogy.
Let's talk about the break-in. This is a fecal-oral transmission, which is the polite medical way of saying, well, hygiene is key.
Right. You ingest the virus, you touched a contaminated surface, then you ate something.
And normally, the stomach is a death trap for microbes because of the acid, right? It's our first line of defense.
Correct. Your stomach is a vat of acid. But remember, rotavirus is non-enveloped and tough. It just cruises right through that acid bath and arrives in the small intestine. It enters a cell, gets taken into a lysosome.
Okay, and the lysosome is like the cell's stomach. It's supposed to rip things apart. But the text mentions a quirk here. The virus only partially uncoats.
Yes, this is one of my favorite parts of its strategy. Usually a virus wants to fully uncoat to release its genes into the cell to take over. But rotavirus is smarter than that. It sheds its outer layer, but keeps its inner core, the capsid, completely intact.
Why would it keep its coat on indoors?
Because of that double-stranded RNA we mentioned. Our cells have evolved to see double-stranded RNA as a major sign of a viral invasion. If you have naked dsRNA floating in your cytoplasm, your cell pulls the fire alarm.
The interferon response.
Exactly that. It triggers the interferon response, which shuts down all protein production and basically tells the cell to self-destruct. So rotavirus stays inside its shell to hide from those security cameras. It's full stealth mode.
That is devious. But if it's locked in a shell, how does it reproduce? It can't use the cell's tools if it's hiding from them.
It brings its own tools.
Yeah.
This is a key point in Chapter 30. The virion itself contains an enzyme called RNA-dependent RNA polymerase.
And it needs its own because?
Because human cells don't have an enzyme that can copy RNA from an RNA template. We only copy RNA from DNA. So the virus sits inside its armored core, uses its own private enzyme to print off copies of positive strand RNA, and then shoots them out through the spokes like ticker tape.
Okay, so it's printing instructions and firing them out into the cell, and what do those instructions do?
They serve a double duty. Some of them act as messenger RNA, telling the cell's ribosomes to make viral proteins, build me a new capsid, build me a new spike protein. The others act as templates to create new negative strands, which then form the new double-stranded genomes for the next generation of viruses.
I want to look at figure 30.3, because there's a step here that seems to contradict everything we just said.
I know which one you mean.
We established this is a non-enveloped virus, but the diagram clearly shows new viral particles butting into the endoplasmic reticulum and picking up a membrane, an envelope.
You caught the transient envelope. This is a classic trick question on virology exams. It confuses everyone the first time they see it.
So it does put on a coat.
For a few minutes, yes. The new viral cores butt into the ER and they grab a membrane. But as the virus matures, that membrane is stripped away and lost. It's like putting on a raincoat just to walk down a hallway and then taking it off before you actually go outside.
That seems incredibly wasteful. Why does it do that?
The theory is that it has to do with how the virus assembles its final outer capsid proteins. It uses the membrane as a sort of scaffold to click all the final pieces into place. Once the structure is locked in, the membrane is discarded. So by the time the virus bursts out of the cell, it's naked again.
And how does it get out?
It's not subtle. It leaves by cell lysis.
It just blows the cell up.
It blows the cell up.
Which brings us to the actual damage. We've got millions of these little wheels bursting out of cells. What is this doing to us?
Okay, so we need to look at the geography of the gut. We're in the small intestine, specifically the jejunum. This is prime real estate for absorbing nutrients.
Right, and figure 30.4 shows the histology. A normal intestine has these long, finger-like projections.
Villi, you can think of them like a shag carpet. They dramatically increase the surface area so you can absorb your food. But now look at the infected diagram in figure 30.4.
It looks like someone took a lawnmower to that carpet. The villi are all short and stubby.
Exactly. They're blunted and atrophied.
So shorter grass means less surface area.
Right. You physically can't absorb nutrients as well. But there's a secondary mechanism that's actually even more important for the symptoms. The very tips of those villi, the brush border, is where you keep specific enzymes, like disaccharidases.
Disaccharidases, those break down complex sugars, right? Like lactose in milk.
Precisely. So when the virus mows down the villi, you lose those enzymes. You essentially become temporarily, but severely lactose intolerant.
Oh, I see where this is going. So you have a sick infant and a parent gives them milk or formula to try and soothe them.
And the baby's gut can't digest the sugar in the milk. The enzymes are just gone. So that sugar just sits in the gut lumen. And now we have to talk about physics. Nature hates a gradient.
Osmosis.
Osmosis kicks in. You have this high concentration of sugar in the gut, so water from the body rushes into the gut to try and dilute it. It's trying to balance the concentration.
And all that water pouring into the gut leads to
massive watery diarrhea. That's osmotic diarrhea. It's not usually bloody because you're not tearing deep holes in the tissue, but the sheer volume of fluid loss is staggering.
That connects the dots so well. It's not just that the virus irritates the gut. It destroys the machinery you need to process food, and then physics turns your gut into a water slide.
A terrifyingly accurate description.
Yeah.
And for a 10-pound baby, losing that much water that quickly is life-threatening within hours.
So let's talk about the scope of this. We know almost everyone gets it, but the source says Group A rotaviruses are the main culprit for the really dangerous cases.
Yeah, Group A is the one that really targets infants and children under 2. That's the danger zone. By age 3 or 4, pretty much every child has been exposed and has developed some antibodies.
What about adults? If I'm changing a diaper and get a massive dose of this virus, am I going to end up in the ER?
You might have a really bad day, but probably not the ER. In adults, it's usually a mild or even a subclinical case. We have immunological memory. Our body sees that wheel structure and goes, "Oh, I remember you," and it mounts a response much faster.
And we just have more fluid reserves to begin with.
Exactly. You can handle losing a liter of water a lot better than a toddler can.
The text also mentions a specific protective factor for infants breastfeeding.
This is a really high-yield point. Breastfed infants often get a significantly milder disease. They're getting IgA antibodies directly from their mother's milk. Those antibodies literally coat the gut lining and can neutralize the virus before it even gets a chance to attach. It's passive protection.
And there's a seasonality to this, right? We don't see this in July.
No, it's nicknamed the winter vomiting bug for a reason. In North America, the cases peak between January and March.
Okay, let's widen the lens. The source draws a really sharp, painful line between the impact in the U.S. versus developing countries.
It does. In the U.S., rotavirus causes high morbidity. That means a lot of sickness, a lot of doctor visits, parents missing work. It's miserable and expensive. But the mortality is very low.
Because we have supportive care.
Right. If a baby gets dehydrated, you drive to the hospital to get an IV, and they bounce back pretty quickly.
But globally,
in developing nations where clean water can be scarce and you can't just drive to an ER for an IV, that dehydration kills. It is a tragedy of logistics. The biology is the same everywhere, but the outcome is dictated by resources.
So a kid comes into the clinic with watery diarrhea. Could be anything. How do we know for sure it's rotavirus?
Clinically, you often can't tell just by looking. It mimics a lot of other bugs. The gold standard mentioned in the text is an ELISA.
Enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. We see that acronym a lot.
Right. It's a test that looks for the viral antigen little pieces of the capsid in a stool sample. It's fast, it's cheap, and it's accurate. You could use an electron microscope to look for the wheels, but nobody does that routinely. That's for research labs.
Okay, the ELISA is positive. We have a diagnosis. What's the cure? Give me the silver bullet.
And here's the hard truth. There is no silver bullet. There are no antivirals that kill rotavirus.
So we just watch and wait.
We support. The treatment is entirely focused on keeping the patient alive while their own immune system fights the war. The golden rule is fluid and electrolyte replacement.
It sounds almost too simple. Just sugar water.
But it's arguably one of the most important medical interventions of the 20th century. Oral rehydration therapy, which is basically water with a very specific ratio of salt and sugar, saves millions of lives. It uses a specific transport mechanism in the gut to force water absorption even when the villi are damaged.
That's incredible. It's like hacking the body's own rules to fight back against the virus.
It is.
Now, obviously, prevention is better than treatment. The text talks about vaccines.
We have 2 main vaccines available now. They're both live-attenuated, which means they use a weakened form of the virus. And they're given orally, no needles, which parents and babies both appreciate.
But the text makes a very specific point to mention safety, specifically about a condition called intussusception. That's a mouthful. Can you unpack that?
It is. Intussusception is a serious condition where one part of the bowel telescopes into itself, like a collapsible spyglass. It causes a blockage, and it's a surgical emergency.
And that was linked to a vaccine.
Decades ago, yes. An early version of a rotavirus vaccine was pulled from the market because it was found to slightly increase the risk of this happening. And that Understandably caused a lot of hesitation.
Of course.
But Lippincott is very explicit here, and it's so important for us to be clear. The current vaccines have been rigorously tested in huge trials and are not associated with that risk. They're considered safe and highly effective.
A crucial distinction. We're not using the 1990s vaccine. And finally, the unglamorous side of prevention, sanitation.
You have to block the highway. Since it's fecal-oral, things like better sewage treatment and, of course, hand washing are the first line of defense. But remember what we said at the start? This virus is naked and tough. Hand sanitizer isn't always enough. You really need soap and water to physically wash it away.
So let's bring it all home. We've gone from molecular architecture to global health to gut physics. If you had to summarize Chapter 30 for our listener, what are the high-yield takeaways?
Okay, here's the cheat sheet. Number 1, the agent. Reoviridae are double-stranded RNA. They're segmented. They're naked viruses. And rotavirus looks like a wheel. Got it. Number 2, the heist. It replicates in the cytoplasm, but stays inside its core to hide from the immune system. It wears that weird temporary coat in the ER, but then takes it off before it leaves.
Okay.
Number 3, the damage. It blunts the villi in your small intestine, wipes out your sugar-digesting enzymes, and that causes osmotic diarrhea. Water follows sugar.
And number 4,
The fix. No drugs, just fluids, 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 and vaccinate to prevent it in the first place.
a semester of virology in about 15 minutes.
And hopefully a healthy respect for the common stomach bug.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, I just want to circle back to where we started, that name, orphan.
It really sticks with you, doesn't it?
It does. We labeled this virus orphaned and harmless just because we couldn't immediately see the disease it caused, and it makes you wonder about what we're looking at today.
That is the big question in modern microbiology, isn't it? We're sequencing the human microbiome and finding thousands of viruses living in our gut that we currently just label as commensal or harmless bystanders.
Exactly. Are they really just bystanders? Or are some of them other orphans? Could one of these mystery viruses actually be the driver behind things like, I don't know, autoimmune diseases, chronic fatigue, or IBS, and we just haven't connected the dots yet?
It's almost a certainty that we're missing something. The orphan of today could easily be the headline of tomorrow.
On that cheerful thought, go wash your hands with soap. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the microscopic world.
Stay curious and stay hydrated.
This has been the Last Minute Lecture Team signing off.